Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Torch News. I'm Brandon.
I'm Jake, and we have a very special episode for you today. But before we get started, I'd just like to thank our network, LibertyCaster, which you can find at libertycaster.com. And I encourage you to watch all of the other shows on LibertyCaster, including the Exchange Podcast with Kevin Morenpold, Liberty Rant with Larry Sharp, the Commander's Table with Ken Armstrong, Tough Crowd with Brett Blackham, The Voice of Liberty with Henry Conaloy, Radio Free New York, and Pace in Freedom with James Pace. This is going to be a super exciting episode because we are very honored to be joined by the Libertarian presidential nominee, Dr. Joe Jorgensen. Dr. Jorgensen, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We are very excited to have you.
Oh, so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into some conversation for today, why don't you tell us, just takes 60 seconds or so, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you come from.
Well, I grew up in a little town north of Chicago, came from pretty much blue-collar roots. So unlike a lot of people who have held the presidency, I understand what it's like to live under the laws. And I'd like to point out that when we formed our government, that the people who passed the laws were supposed to only pass laws for a couple months and then go live under them. And I don't think Joe Biden has lived under a law in his entire life. I then went to school in Texas, got my BS in psychology from Baylor and BA from SMU. A while later, in my 40s, in my second educational splurge, I got my PhD in industrial organizational psychology, and I now teach at Clemson University, and it's probably the best job ever, other than maybe being president. That might top it.
Well, I don't doubt that you might become president, especially given the current situation. Everyone agrees that it's time for a change. And so the fact that we have a pretty awesome libertarian nominee this year, Gary Johnson back in 2016. Now, 2016 was the first time I was able to vote in a presidential election. And the libertarians gave me Gary Johnson. I'm like, okay, I guess. So it's exciting.
He is a libertarian.
He is a libertarian. He is a libertarian. So, Joe, the first thing that we wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about, and for our regular viewers, you guys all know we typically talk about the news of the day and things that are going on. We're going to take a little bit of a different approach today to have a little more of a topical episode. And so the first thing that Brandon and I really want to talk about, because it's something that affects us directly, is young people and their place in the Libertarian Party. Brandon, you want to bring us in on this?
Yeah, so typically young people tend to lean to the left side. And Joe, maybe you see this, working at a university, or universities tend to lean to one side disproportionately. They tend to lean to the left, and a lot of young people now grow up to be more left-leaning, and they tend to associate themselves with the left-leaning candidates. Now, those people, those people can be either really hyped about the process, or they can be really disenfranchised from the entire political process because they feel like they don't fit. But, how do we, right, they've been able to bring a lot of college-age students into the camp, the Democrats. How do we bring them in, compete with candidates like Bernie Sanders, like Elizabeth Warren? How do we do that?
We like to call them the Santa Claus candidates. They get to throw free things around.
Yeah. How can you compete with Santa Claus, right? Yeah. So the first problem is that the faculty are very liberal. Sure. And there have been studies showing anywhere from like 80% to maybe 92% of faculty are liberal. And what's interesting is that's even worse in my field of psychology. There was a poll taken, a quick, hand-raised poll at a social psychology conference, which showed that something like 800 social psychologists were liberal and only like 6 were conservative. So that's like, does that even go out on the calculator, that many zeros? So it is so hard to combat that. Now, let me mention real quick, that's one of the reasons why I love teaching at Clemson, is I believe it is less liberal. I think that students are more open, and it's almost kind of funny saying that conservatives are more open to different ideas, because traditionally Democrats were, the 1960s, free speech, and you get to say what you want, love who you want, and all of that. And now they're the ones who are so against free speech. So I'm really fortunate to be among conservatives who will at least listen to me. Well, let me wait before my boss hears this and gets concerned. Unlike liberal professors, I do not bring my politics into the classroom.
Yep.
In fact, I specifically, and that's what we got going against us. If you're a libertarian, then you're honest, you understand life, liberty, and property, and the people pay for tuition. You should deliver what they paid for tuition, and you should not be giving them your personal opinion. So that puts us at a disadvantage because we've got more integrity with that. So, and there are, many leftists pushing their position. But what I do, and I always point this out to students, I say that nowadays it's so hard to find a psychology book that is geared towards, it's a science, and it is a science. But so many psychology books now have so much policy. So what
Really?
What?
I'm surprised by that fact. I didn't know that.
Really? Oh my God. Oh.
I'll tell you, I've never taken a psychology class. I went through 4 years of school,
Wow.
170 credits, not one psychology class.
Wow. Well, I reckon I can offline. I can give you a few books to read. Because if you think about it, psychology is a study of brain and behavior. It's kind of like the owner's manual to being a human. So, in fact, I won't name any names, but one of my fellow faculty members said, "Oh, you got to check out this book. It's an awesome book. Maybe you should consider using it for your class." And I'm reading. It's like gun control, and just like one thing after the next,
Wow.
and all liberal, right? So. Anyway, so I choose the ones that are least political, and I point out to the students, I worked very hard to get a scientific book. And then I do, in fact, if you don't mind my going off on a little tangent.
No, please. That's what this is for.
Yeah, you guys seem kind of informal, so I'm rolling with it. In my social psychology book, the first edition, they talked about tragedy of the commons. Are you familiar with that?
Tragedy of the Commons?
Not enough to talk about it on air, so please, if you enlighten us.
Tragedy of the commons. It's basically when you have a property or something that everybody owns and nobody owns, so people don't have a vested interest in taking care of it. And my textbook gave the classic example in which they pointed out that the Soviet Union was basically starving their people. It was like, we pretend to work, you pretend to pay us kind of thing. And so they were starving their people. Their farmlands were not productive. So finally, the government gave in and said, okay, tell you what, we will let you have your own plot of land. And so you can, but just like a small, like little garden, right? So that can be yours. Now, we don't believe in private property, but you can have that plot of land. Well, it turns out that those plots of land consisted of 3% of the entire farmland of the country. And yet they produced 30% of the food.
Wow.
And I love that statistic. And I thought it was a great example. And I was so disappointed when the second version came out, they had omitted it, probably because of all the liberal professors complaining. So even though I'm on my 4th edition of the book, I still go back and I say, there's this great example in the first edition that they no longer have. And if you don't mind, if I just go one more on tragedy.
Please keep.
Only because you guys are young, and this is something that I think your audience would be interested in. If we look at poaching and how tragic it is, like with the elephants, killing the elephants for their tusks, and that certain tigers are almost extinct. And people say, oh, these evil poachers, right? The government needs to do something. Here's the problem. The poachers are poaching on either government land or, land that's kind of nobody's, because there is no vested interest. Nobody has a vested interest, so they go out and, take whatever they can. Now, the example I give is, look at an American farm. Have you ever heard of a farmer go out back, shoot all of his cows, and say, wow, I got a really great haul today? No, because you have a vested interest in continuing to breed the cows so that you have future profits. So profits are what guide you to make better decisions and to conserve and to protect. And tragedy of the, and that's why it's called a tragedy, and commons as in common ground. So there's nothing there. So to finally get around to answering the question you asked, you know, all we can do is grow the movement and speak reasonably. And I think we need to talk in terms that they understand.
Sure.
And I've, you know, since I'm a faculty member, I have to keep in mind that I can't use undue pressure. And I never talk politics in class. Every now and then I'll use a political example, but I'll say, okay, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, or you should vote for it. I'll give about, you know, 30 disclaimers before giving the example. But for a while there, I would walk by, you know, where they have all the tables set up, like the Bernie Bros and everybody. And I thought, okay, I'm an instructor. What do I do if a, you know, Bernie person, a student, because I can't disrespect the students.
Sure.
So what do I do? And I thought, I've got the perfect line. I will say, no, thank you. I prefer to have the power be for the little people.
I like that line. I like that line. That's good.
Yeah.
You know, the issue that I've had with a lot of my more liberal friends, oh, I say issue, the problem I've had with being able to convert some of my more liberal friends into the party, and you'll have to excuse the dog barking in the background, but the problem I've had is, you know, a lot of these people have gone to school, right, good majors, and took on a lot of debt because all their lives, their parents and the media and everyone told them, well, you go to college and that'll make sure that you have a good future and you'll make a lot of money. And now they're sitting at home jobless or working some minimum wage job, doing whatever you are doing during COVID. And they're in all of this debt, which is now coming due because we graduated last May. And they see Bernie Sanders, who says, you know, guys, we're just going to forgive that debt. We're going to wipe your slate clean because society lied to you. And, you know, it's hard for me to be able to convince them why our movement is actually in the long term better for them. What would you say to someone in that position?
Well, first of all, I would say that I would point out that the reason college prices are so high is because of the federal government, because they flooded the market.
Sure.
And also, I would ask a question, and depending on who I'm talking to, I would phrase it differently. But the question is basically, why should car mechanics, electricians, and cashiers at the convenience store pay for the college education of doctors, lawyers, and accountants? Because that's what's going on.
Sure.
And if I were talking to an electrician or something, or somebody who's going to be an electrician, I would say, you don't have a college degree. Why should you be paying for this accountant's degree? And the current statistics, fairly recently, I haven't seen any updated ones, are that if you have a college degree, you earn $1 million more across your lifetime, from ages 24 to, you know, whatever.
Sure.
So why shouldn't the person who earns $1 million more be the one to pay for school? Why do you want the person who earns less than $1 million to be the one to pay for the one who earns more than $1 million more?
Yeah, it's an interesting statistic. I wonder if that's going to hold true for our generation. We'll have to keep an eye on that.
Well, I question that because the attitude has really changed. Because, you know, in my day, you know, when I was your age, you know, when I walked uphill in the snow both ways from school, you know, school or college wasn't really seen as a requirement to get anywhere in life, and there was a bigger middle class, and you know, you could work at a factory and get a pretty decent living. You could build cars for General Motors. Although I would like to point out, a lot of people say, oh, our country's gone downhill, we can't do that anymore. Actually, we could do that because it was after the war and we were, you know, supplying everybody around the country. So it's not that we've gone downhill, it's that was a boom period. But nevertheless, when I was of college age, not everybody was so eager to get into college.
Yeah. I think that, you know, that there's, you know, you brought up a few really good points. I guess the first thing is, like, being after the war, there was the opportunity to do that. Not a lot of people do bring that up, that there was different ages prompt different opportunities and different things that are in need.
A lot of people harken back to this 1950s post-war era as the default for America and kind of forget the rest of America where most people were poor and starving. So I appreciate that you are brought up that point, that was a boom. That wasn't the default. That wasn't the way things were. That wasn't the way things were always, and now things suck. But I'm sorry, Brendan, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just you know, a lot of really great points that are being brought up here. You know, when we're going back to, I really want to go back to the, you know, the point about you know, Bernie and the other Democrats and the Santa Claus thing and the debt forgiveness. I liked the point that you brought up that you know, asking, you know, blue collar workers, well, you know, would you want to pay for somebody else's degree? And I think that that's something that is an important point that we make, because I don't think that that's really socialized very well. Of that, the money is coming from somewhere, and it's not always coming from you, and it's also not always just coming from other educated people. The majority, I don't know if this is true, but I'm sure that the majority of Americans are not white collar workers. You know, so I actually think that that's a really great point that you bring up, and it's something that is contrasting both of the candidates on the stage. That is really great to see. But you know, how do we socialize that point? How do we socialize that, you know, the money has to come from somewhere, right? So whose responsibility really is it? Now, also there is the point of, why is college as expensive as it is?
Sure.
And you know, do we think that that is the federal government? You know, funding various universities, allowing the price to inflate? Do we think that that's, you know, the loans and the interest and all of that? Is there one source for it? I'm not really sure.
So the interesting point about the federal government's involvement in the student debt crisis was that the reason we have a student debt crisis is because students can't declare bankruptcy. There is a loophole that says that students who have student debt cannot declare bankruptcy. And the little known fact is that it was Senator Joe Biden who helped push that legislation through way back when, closing the loophole specifically for students.
Yeah, and can I add something else? And the politician escapes me who it was who said that, but they were grilling bankers, you know, and some bailout, and, you know, major bankers. And one of the congressmen, congress lady, whoever it was, said, and I want to know what you're doing about the student loan crisis. And one by one down the line, each banker said, we don't deal in student loans. Next one, we don't deal in student loans. So the politician doesn't even know that the student loans have been basically taken out of the hands of and they're the ones in charge. And yet there's a politician saying, what are you going to do about it? You know, the politician should have been like, yeah, pointing the finger at himself, herself, whoever it was. I'm going to have to go back and find that clip, because that's a good one. And that almost rivals, if you don't mind my going along with this.
Please.
So, you know, we had the Civil Rights Act passed, which you can't discriminate race, creed, sex, so forth. But did you know that Congress was exempt from that? And so somewhere, I forget, this 70s, 80s, whatever. And this is before the 24-hour news cycle, or I know who it was, but I can kind of picture him. It was a white-haired congressman. And somebody suggested, you know what? Congress should pass those same laws, you know, so we have anti-discrimination for Congress. And the politician puffed up his chest and said, I should be able to hire whoever I want.
Wow.
Just pass the laws for everybody else. And I should be laughing. It's tragic. It's tragic. So that they're not willing to live under the laws that they pass. And that's the one message that I'm trying to get across. You know, we hear about Democrats versus Republicans and how, you know, oh, this big battle about, you know, these people are so evil and these people are so, they're the same. They're the same. It was a Democrat politician saying, oh, I should be able to hire whoever I want. So, yeah.
So, I mean, what you're really saying is that there's such a double standard. And, you know, I think what we've really said so far today is that, you know, there's this huge double standard between the government and the people. And, you know, also, and then, you know, the other point that we brought up was that, you know, one party or, you know, both party are just promising things that aren't going to happen. In terms of this student debt crisis, just to finish that point, do you think that anybody's going to make any headway on it in terms of, you know, Democrats or Republicans haven't made any statements on it really, but do you think there's going to be any headway made on it?
Not from them. And I use Trump. I use Trump as an example because, the polls got it wrong that he was going to win because they weren't polling people who hadn't voted in 20 years or people who had never voted because they figured, it's not worth it. It's same, they're all the same. They're all cut from the same cloth, same old, same old.
Yep.
And Trump comes in, right? And he's an outsider.
Yeah.
And so people are like, yeah, finally an outsider. And so he parachutes in. And keep in mind, he did not have 40, 50 years of political favors to repay.
Yeah.
He comes in as president, and he grows government even bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And my argument is if even Trump can't get government smaller, no Republican can. Because everybody else who gets there comes there with more baggage and more favors, and they've basically lived, like Joe Biden. They've lived on the government largesse their entire life.
Yeah.
They haven't had to go out and earn their own living. So if even Trump can't do it, it's going to have to be a libertarian. So as long as they're in charge, no, it's hopeless.
I feel like
that's an excellent point. I never thought about it like that. Trump, I can get things done under budget, can't even shrink the federal government. What are other Republicans going to do? In
fact, if you don't mind, I'd like to comment on that.
Yeah.
I saw an interview with Mayor Ed Koch, who was mayor of New York City back when Trump, heyday. And the government had tried for something like 6 or 7 years to get Woolman Rink built, skating rink in, I guess, Manhattan, and couldn't do it. Finally, Trump said, tell you what, I'll spend my own money and I'll get it done. And he had it done in less than a year. And I thought it was pretty smart of him. First thing he did was he called up his Canadian friends and said, hey, how do you build a skating rink? If you're gonna find out how to build a skating rink, they're the ones to go to.
Sure.
So I saw this interview with Mayor Ed Koch, and Ed Koch said, well, here's the thing about Trump. Here's why Trump could do it and we couldn't. Because every contractor in the city knew that if they did not do it on time, if they did not come in on budget, they would never work for him again. And I'm like, yeah, like that's the way it should work. And his point was that's not the way government works. You've got to put out the RFPs, the request for proposal, and if you do a lousy job, oh well, got to give you another chance. And so that just shows one way how Trump could do more as a private citizen because he had the power of the free market. And that just demonstrates how the free market works for people because people in the free market have to compete for quality and budget and cost. And you don't get that in the government.
So what we really have to do is we have to start threatening the contractors. We gotta make sure.
Trump might be willing to do that. Trump's the kind of guy that would call up the military to make sure that contractors get things done on time.
Hey,
he's calling up the military for other things.
Non-aggression principle.
Yes.
If you don't complete this, I will leave you alone. Yeah.
Well, speaking of aggression, the last thing, and it's completely off topic from what we've been talking about, but what we wanted to kind of end the show talking about was this interesting, I don't want to call it a nation state in Seattle, but they're calling themselves the Autonomous Zone. How does a libertarian president deal with people, just taking over a couple of city blocks? Because I'll tell you what, when I was on the campaign trail, and I am technically on the campaign trail right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. People, I look at
my condolences, or should I say my condolences?
Yeah, well, let me tell you, running libertarian in New York is not easy.
Also, you probably know where Woolman Rink is.
Yes.
Is it in Manhattan?
Yes.
I figured.
Is it in Manhattan? Yes.
I think so.
Oh,
didn't mean to put you on the spot there.
Audience members, don't chew my head off about this.
We're both on Long Island, so we're both a little farther away. Yeah.
Well, I figured it was Manhattan since that's where Trump is. So
yeah, maybe.
So I look at crises that happen, right? And I think to myself, well, if I was the politician in that situation, how am I dealing with this crisis? And I'll tell you, I'm pretty good at coming up with answers to most things. And then a couple of people took over some city blocks in Seattle. And I said, how as a libertarian do I deal with that? Because on the one hand, okay, well, you are, trying to secede from our union. And we've already decided through a bloody civil war that that's not okay. And on the other hand, I kind of root for you.
On the other hand, what?
On the other hand, I kind of root for them.
Well, here's where the good news for me. I'm running for federal office. So and I'm not just saying this facetiously. Part of the problem with government is that the federal government puts its nose where it shouldn't be. For instance, education. Education is a local issue. It should be decided among parents, teachers, and students. Crime is a local issue. It should be decided among the mayor, city council, police, taxpayers, voters, whatever. So I would only go into a situation if it were really necessary, if somebody's rights were being violated, or if they needed help and the governor specifically asked me for help. I wouldn't threaten to go in. So as I can't really say psychologist, but as somebody, PhD in psychology, I can say it looks like a really interesting experiment, and we'll see how it turns out. So it's a really tough issue, I'm sure, for the libertarians who are running for state and local government there.
Yeah. Oh,
well, I'll tell you that's exactly the answer that I would hope to hear from a libertarian candidate.
Oh.
The federal government should not be involved. It's not their place, and I appreciate that.
Yes.
I will say that I've already kept you over the time that I promised your people I would keep you, and so.
Well, I took so long on that first answer because, like I said, you guys are young, so I thought this might be of interest.
Yeah.
We are absolutely thrilled that you were willing to have this conversation with us. Yeah. And thank you so much for joining us. As I wrap up, I'd like to thank LibertyCaster, our network, one more time. Thank you for doing everything you do to keep us here. And I encourage all of you to watch all the other shows on LibertyCaster. That's the Exchange Podcast with Kevin Wormhold, Liberty Ramp with Larry Sharp, The Commander's Table with Ken Armstrong, Tough Crowd with Brett Blackham, The Voice of Liberty with Henry Conaloy, Radio Free New York, and Pace and Freedom with James Pace. And I think I'm almost getting okay at saying all of that. I encourage you all to check out our new merchandise site in conjunction with LibertyCaster.com. That's AmericanT.biz. That's AmericanLiberty.biz. That's AmericanLibertee.biz. We have a ton of cool merch on there. The Torch News should be putting out merch in the near future as well. Dr. Jorgensen, thank you so much again for joining us. And everyone, have a great day.
And can I add to please visit my site?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Wow. I'm so rude to our guest. I'm such an awful host.
Oh, not rude. But joj2020.com. If you're interested in checking me out, it's joj2020.com. And I'd like to add real quick, we are ecstatic that we've had so many non-libertarian volunteers. So we hope to create a movement.
Yeah. No, we're both signed up. We should be.
We did sign up.
Soon.
We signed up to do some tech stuff. So awesome. This should be interesting. Yes. Yeah.
We're here to help you out. We're both techies. Jake's coming from software development. I'm coming from data science. We're both here to help you out where we can. So
awesome.
We're really looking forward to it.
Yes.
And we're excited. We're especially excited, just before we end, to have a psychologist in the race.
Well, I'm not legally allowed to call myself a psychologist in South Carolina.
Gotcha.
Having to do with licensing laws that are against. But I do have a PhD. In my home state, I could be called a psychologist.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're very excited. We look forward to hopefully having you on the debate stage.
A well-educated,
a
well-educated human being to go against, Trump.
More degrees than a thermometer, as they say. Because I didn't even tell you about my other degree that I usually hide from people. So.
Oh, what's that? Well, big reveal on the show now.
Do you want one? I mean, you're already signing off. I don't want to.
No, listen. You know what? This is what we're here for.
Okay, so you guys are getting the scoop. I have rarely mentioned this, and I made sure it wasn't in my Wikipedia page. I also have an MSW, Master's in Social Work, which I recently got.
Oh.
And I only say that because it's probably the most liberal degree you can get, and it just kind of confuses people. So, anyway.
Well, you know what? You know what? I think, though, it's a good point that social work doesn't have to be liberal.
It doesn't. And I have a graduate certificate in drug and alcohol studies.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah.
Well, quite the qualifications.
These are quite the qualifications that, you know what,
Especially
people
if you're
wouldn't
dealing
know
with
on
Congress.
the surface. People wouldn't know these on the surface, and I know we already said we were going to end, but like...
Yeah, but you know what?
Yeah.
That's okay. We can keep going.
And I don't have a law degree. That's the
And you
thing. The degrees that I do have don't count. What counts is I don't have a law degree, because then I can't pass laws that the average person can't understand.
Well, and isn't
Good.
that a damn shame that the laws we're supposed to follow, we can't read? I mean, I ran for county legislature last year, and I'm reading some of these laws that my opponents passed, and I'm a little ashamed to admit it, but I couldn't understand a word they said.
Yeah. Hey, I got a PhD and I have an accountant do my taxes. I'm not dealing with that.
I want every law to be able to be written on a Post-it note from now
Exactly.
on.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
There you
it. Yeah. No more executive orders. Post-it note. That's it. Well, they shouldn't be around in the first place. But no, this is really great conversation.
Yes.
And you know, hopefully when you are on the stage,
it was a lot of fun. I usually don't stay this late. It was a lot of fun.
Good. I'm glad you had fun. Well,
Yeah.
that means hopefully we'll get you back before November.
Okay. Done.
Great.
All right, perfect.
All right.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you so
we
much
had a
for
great
coming.
time talking,
Okay.
and I'm sure our viewers enjoyed it so much too. So thanks again.
Yes, thanks
and,
to our viewers who have been supporting us. Last week's episode was a really great success. We're really thrilled to see that everyone is enjoying it. And tune in next week for our Libertarian vice presidential nominee. That will be an interesting one, although I forbid nipples on my show.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much, and we'll sign out.
Signing
My
out.
pleasure. Thanks so much. Have a good evening.
You too.